It takes discipline to hold what we perceive as two polar opposites in our mind's eye on a road to finding the truths in both of the polar opposites. It's taxing to wade such conflicts, determining what is good and bad for ourselves, fighting cognitive dissonance. And I say kudos to those that are putting in the work. Okay, so it's a great mental exercise to try to hold two polar opposite things in your head at the same time. Because we do all view reality in a subjective manner. Okay, I actually just tweeted out and shared a photo that, depending on the time of day, depending on who you are, and other issues, depending on what screen you use, and so on and so forth, picture of sneakers that Scott Adams and others shared, and depending on the person, that it appears to be a different color. Okay, and we also have the Laurel and Yanni YouTube video. Check that out, as well as the classic blue-yellow dress meme that was out there before. So even the way that our brains, notably colorblind people, of course, but the way that our brains even interpret color, just color itself and visuals themselves, is dramatically different from person to person. So, of course, when you have concepts and ideas and facts, in your head, two polar opposite things, they could coexist. It's your perception that they're polar opposites, of course. But they might be more linked than you believe. But of course, when you have two distinct things, two distinct ideas, concepts, philosophies, approaches, so on and so forth, okay, you have two different ones. Of course, there are truths, if, you would hope that both hold logic and reason in frame. If there's any merit to them at all, you have two different sets of truths, and together, when you bring them together, you get something, when you start to A/B test and focus on the merits of both, and also signal the flaws in both arguments or both concepts, and find the best of both worlds, put it together, and that's when you can come to a new truth. Truth being, of course, the ultimate truth, being unknowable, but you can come to a newer truth, an updated truth, and then you'll have another opinion to bounce off of from there. It'll come back to two opinions or more, and then you can find where the truth lies in between or on any one of those specific points. So, but I do believe it is cognitively taxing to hold contradictions in your head, of course. And it is confusing, it is disorienting, and it's hard. It's hard when you have cognitive dissonance and you don't want, your brain just does, it has an idea in its head, in your head, you have an idea, your brain's working with you, with its mechanisms, and it's telling you, this is right. How can this be wrong? I was so convinced it was right. And then something else comes in that is like, and you just go, I don't want to accept it. I mean, maybe it's right. Maybe it's wrong, but I don't even want to accept it. That's the first response. The first thing a lot of times we think when we hear somebody speaking is, I disagree. We want to naturally disagree because we already have a stable reality. We have our confirmation of the way things are. And it usually, if you're smart, it takes more than a whim, more than an impulse to change your mind. It takes a lot of work. And the more that we run the same idea and the same information through our neural pathways, through our brain, the more it gets fortified, and the more the confirmation bias takes hold. So I say, if you do want to be a bit more, for lack of a better word, intellectual, if you want to be a knowledge addict, okay, an information addict and a truth seeker, it is important to get used to holding two, that is to say, two polar opposites, even. It doesn't have to be polar opposites, but that is the most intensive exercise you could do with your head. You want to hold two seeming opposites in your head at the same time. It's very hard to do, but if you can get used to that thought process, it'll make thinking a little easier, especially when information seems to be conflicting and seems to be. Sometimes we get into, some more than others, a right think and wrong think. Right think and wrong think attitude. Now, I'm not talking about double think, the 1984 Orwellian term that I mentioned, I believe, in one of my last two videos. I'm not necessarily referring to that, because you need to be aware, when you're doing this exercise, you need to be aware that you're holding two polar opposites in your head. With double think, you're not really aware. You're just holding this contradiction in your head, and you're following through in reality with your words and actions based on a sense of ignorance of what's happening. And I'm saying, well, you don't have to be ignorant. If you have doublethink now, and I'm sure that I might have doublethink about something, I can't say what at this exact time, but I leave myself open to these things. Being aware of it and learning the process and learning how our brains work is really, in my mind, pretty important. So I do preach a little bit about that.